Welcome to HCD's podcast Mindset, the go-to destination for all things behavioral science, neuromarketing, and consumer research. I'm your host, Michelle Nagella, and I'm thrilled to have you with us today for a conversation to spark your curiosity and leave you with a wealth of insights. In today's exciting episode, we speak with HCD's own Sophia Stafford, our newly promoted Manager of Global Research and Consulting. So join us as we dive into Sophia's wealth of experience in neuroscience, analytics, and cognitive sciences. Learn how she navigates the intricacies of consumer research, leveraging behavioral and neuroscientific experiences. Now, before we dive into this, a quick call to action to take a moment to like and subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. And a reminder to check out our resources available like white papers, conference presentations, and other great content on our website, www.hcdi.net. So let's get going. Whether you're commuting, working out, or just relaxing, let's embark on another journey of knowledge and discovery right here on HCD's Mindset. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of HCD Research's Mindset. Super excited to have our guest, Sophia, with us today. Sophia Stafford is actually my coworker. She is here at HCD leading up account management and our global research initiatives, and super excited to have her join us because I want you all to get to know her as well. And today we're going to kind of sort out who she is and maybe a little bit about what we see in 2024 as being like the cool and exciting stuff. So Sophia, welcome.
Thank you. Yes, it's good to be here. I've heard a lot about it, but I've never been on before.
For the first time for anything. I love getting to know people a little better by finding out a little bit about their origin story, as I like to say.
Mhm.
And in your case, it really is like a neuro origin story. So I'd love to find out, like, how did you get into neuroscience?
Yeah, I mean, so one thing that I've known about myself, probably just in terms of like what I like to do and like what I'm interested in, has always kind of been centered around neuroscience or psychology. And I think like I remember my first interest being piqued kind of in AP psychology, like in high school.
Oh, wow.
And I specifically remember going to like getting into like the neuroscience section where we're talking about the neuron and the axon and the dendrites and all of that, and being like, what? This is in my brain? Like I had no idea. And it was just so cool to me that there's like one organ that literally controls everything in your body. And so from there I was hooked, and I did my whole college degree on it. I specialized in it, and here we are. So I was just kind of always interested in learning more about what, like how the brain works, like how we don't really know that much about the brain still, or
Yeah.
like how it kind of does
I mean,
anything.
there are still people out there who, I mean, you were just talking about how the brain controls everything, right?
Mhm.
And yet there are still people out there who talk about you only use 10% of your brain,
Right,
right?
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure when you meet people and you say, oh, I do neuroscience or I'm a
Mhm.
neuroscientist, like they probably ask you some questions.
Yeah.
What do you think is like the most popular thing you hear?
When I was in college and I was like, oh, I'm studying neuroscience, immediate thought was everyone was like, oh, you're going to be a brain surgeon.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
was like, no, very far from a brain surgeon, actually. But I think that that's kind of, if you're not really in the field, like that's just the immediate jump to like what you can do with a
I was on
neuroscience
a
degree.
I was on a plane once and I was sitting next to an older woman. And so maybe her hearing wasn't great. I'm not really sure. Or maybe
Mhm.
she wasn't familiar with neuroscience, but she asked me, oh, what do you do? And I said, oh, I'm a neuroscientist. And she said, what was that? And I said, neuroscientist. And she goes, oh, nursing. And I was like, yep.
Yeah.
you know?
Sometimes it's easier. Sometimes it's easier.
Yeah, because it is a really complicated science. I think,
Mhm.
like you were saying, I think some people think that we know how our bodies work,
Yeah.
and it turns out we don't.
There's still a lot of mystery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I got to ask, so you came out of college and, you have this neuroscience background. What were you thinking of doing, and how did you
Mhm.
end up doing what we do?
Yeah. So my undergrad, it was at University of Rochester, and they're a huge like research facility. They all kind of like specialize in all different types of research. So during my undergrad, I was very much involved in like the clinical research type of thing. And I was really liking that. And I really liked kind of the idea of discovering something new, kind of working with just different ideas and like applying them in different ways rather than more so like that medical side of neuroscience.
Mm. Was there a
But I was,
particular clinical question that you were interested in, like more clinical one?
yeah. Yeah, I was mainly doing work with chronic pain, and I don't know if you've heard of the glymphatic system, but it's
Mhm.
like the lymphatic system, but of your brain. So like overnight
Yeah,
when you sleep,
the
clears out
glia.
all the stuff. So that's what I specialized in my undergrad, but that was still a little too neuroscience heavy for me. I was still kind of
Mm.
having this calling back to psychology and behavior and all of that. So I didn't really want to do my own independent research, which is obviously what you need for a PhD. You need to be really passionate about something.
Yeah.
And I was kind of just passionate about all of it. So I couldn't really narrow down any of my interests. So then I kind of freaked out a little bit and I was like, okay, what am I going to do with this degree? I don't want to go into PhD. I don't want to go to MD. What else is there for me? So then
Yeah.
I kind of just did some research. Google was my best friend senior year for
Yeah.
sure.
You know, when
um,
I was finishing up undergrad, Google was in beta.
Yeah.
So it was still developing. But
Yeah.
yes, and it's funny because my dad was like, when he was 80, he was still saying, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So,
Yeah.
it's not end all yet. You can change like another like 50 times.
Yeah. But like senior year, that's like the most pressure you feel ever
Yeah.
to pick just one profession.
Yeah.
So I was trying to figure out what kind of options were out there for me. And I stumbled upon this idea of neuromarketing, which is a whole can of worms that we can go into. Now that I'm in the field, I understand why that probably wasn't the best thing to be researching.
But
But
you're doing a bit of education in business as well, am I right?
I was not, I had no business or marketing
No, but you were
experience.
interested in this neuromarketing area.
Yeah, well, I was just interested in applying research to industry. So like more of like a
Okay.
real life kind of
Application.
application rather than clinical. I was working
Mhm.
with mice, wasn't
Yeah.
really a fan of that.
Yeah, yeah, same.
Yeah, so I was kind of looking to switch gears, but still stay in research. That's how industry kind of came about.
Hmm. Cool. So how did you find HCD?
Yeah, so HCD was one of a long list of companies that came up when I searched neuromarketing. And you kind of had to dig through the weeds a little bit because some companies were saying that they were neuromarketing, but didn't do any type of neuropsychological research at
What do you
all.
mean by that? What were they doing? I mean, they were calling themselves neuromarketing. So what was the
Yeah, I
idea
think it was
behind?
more so they were kind of interested in the idea of specializing in it, but actually not applying it yet. So like they were kind of like, oh, we understand that there is this need to kind of understand our consumers at a deeper level or at a more personal level with them, but they didn't really know how to apply that yet. So like they would just kind of have like maybe
Like
some
neuro
research
in
articles about
theory.
it. Yeah, more of a theory than an actual application. But then I found HCD's website and there's a whole bunch of resources on just exactly how we specialize in this kind of behavioral
Little
neuroscience.
plug for HCD's website. If you're
Yeah,
interested in seeing some white papers, posters, our webinars all recorded are all available on the resources page, www.hcdi.net. Check it out. It
yeah,
attracted people like Sophia. It might attract you.
yeah. And it's also very like beginner friendly. Like one thing I noticed about all of the materials we have is just that like anyone can really dive into it and like kind of gain something from it.
Yeah.
In my experience, neuroscientific articles are not always that way. So it was
Yeah.
kind of refreshing to see, like a level one entry into this field. So that way I could learn more about it. And then I ended up applying here, and here I am today.
Yeah, it's kind of cool that you say that as being kind of like a feature that attracted you about HCD because I think something that has been really important to us is education. And I
Mhm.
don't, yes, education of the people at HCD, but really more about educating other people that are maybe interested in applied neuroscience or consumer neuroscience or whatever it might be. But educating teams, we come in and we can do educational sessions to help,
Mhm.
maybe people start their programs or understand a little bit better how these applications work and to help you sort through the muck, right? Because there is a lot of junk out there, like you discovered when you were
Right.
looking for jobs, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also like, I think very helpful to kind of have that baseline knowledge just in general, like having an understanding of just kind of how we work as humans is so
Yeah.
beneficial in so many different ways. Like
Yeah.
it's not like beyond just research, like it can help you in any way, just kind of
Yeah.
having that basic foundation of knowledge of like,
Yeah.
okay, how do we work? Why do we work this way? What's kind of
Mhm.
influencing our decisions? What factors do we need to consider in all of these environments? Things like that. So it's education is very important,
Yeah.
definitely.
So when you entered HCD, it was really through the analytics department,
Mhm.
which I think is actually a really good way to enter because you were in the weeds, as
Mhm.
you were kind of mentioning earlier, but the weeds being really, how are we asking questions? How are we doing the stats? Um, when you saw that particular job and you entered in that way, and it was like very heavy in statistics and very heavy
Mhm.
in like detailed work, what was that experience like?
It was very familiar for me. So I was like in undergrad, as I was saying, like I was working as a lab assistant, like very much in the weeds, very much doing kind of not the dirty work, but like just like the work that no one else really wants to be doing. You pass it on to your lab assistant. But I was very much in the data, very much in the stats. So like that's kind of where I felt comfortable. And it was really interesting to me to try and apply my knowledge and my background to kind of this newer field that I was entering of
Yeah.
like neuroscience plus kind of like this market research type of field. Cause I didn't even know what like a max diff was when I joined.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like I was
It's all
learning
about
along the way.
learning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right,
So like
exactly.
you've entered this new role. Can you tell us a little bit? Let's hear what is your official title?
Yes. So my official title is Manager of Global Research and Consulting.
So
So what
what
does that
does that mean?
mean? Basically, I've kind of shifted from where I started as in like more of like the analytics side to kind of more of that upfront client management, kind of working in the proposal process, working with you, Michelle, to like put together a methodology that we think would answer a research question in the best way, kind of calling upon everyone at HCD to really put our heads together and kind of come up with a good research plan that we can move forward with and that we would feel comfortable with, proposing to a client. And then I see that through all the way to the end of, the report process, making sure that our clients' answers were being actually answered and that their questions were really hit on in each of the reports that we write, just to make sure we're all aligned from
Yeah.
all kinds of things.
I think the biggest part of that is working with clients to figure out research questions. So,
Hmm.
what do you think is sort of um, the biggest thing that you've learned in how to help people uncover their real research risks? Because people come to us all the time and they think they have
Yeah,
a research question, right?
right,
And it turns
right.
out we really do have to kind of like work with them to get at an actionable research
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, I've learned that being a good listener is the key to this job.
Yeah.
Being able to listen to kind of what clients are telling you and then being able to interpret that into something that you can actually do a research question or a research program with
Yeah.
is super important. And then being able to kind of remember those learnings and listenings and apply them later on when we are in that report development process.
Yeah.
So I think one thing that I'm definitely still working on is really listening and kind of putting aside my own opinions or my own biases to like actually understand kind of what their business need is rather than what I want their business need to be.
That's really interesting you say it, but I think there's also what I notice when we're talking with clients and listening to their
Hmm.
needs, what they think their needs are.
Hmm.
Often we end up leading them a little bit down a path,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And you can kind of see when they have like that aha moment that, oh, I
Yeah,
thought I was asking this. Like I thought I was asking about, a really simple claims
yeah,
substitution research, but it turns out I'm actually asking like, how does this thing work and how can I prove that?
right,
Right. And it's like a little more
right.
nuanced
Yeah, and that's
interaction.
like I think kind of where we shine in terms of our consulting side of things. I think a lot of people or a lot of companies need more help than they realize when trying to enter this field of neuroscience and psychology. So having kind of experts in the field who have that baseline knowledge, who have that kind of understanding of how these fields work, really help to kind of develop a research question without, hiring an entire staff that has to have this kind of understanding of things. So I think when we kind of come in as consultants, we can really put aside, okay, like what kind of research do you want to be doing?
Yeah.
And really focus on why are we doing this type of research? What is the goal behind each of your research questions? How are we going to answer them? What tools are we going to use?
Yeah.
All of that to really take us, put it into a bigger perspective.
Yeah. Now, you've been doing this for a bit now, actually, in the
Mhm.
background.
Surprisingly.
This is like, yeah, the coming out party for you. But in that, what have you started to see as common questions or
Mhm.
like trends you're seeing amongst clients?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are coming to us recently with the question of how do we go beyond just the explicit? So, like
Mm,
understanding the full consumer experience beyond what consumers are self-reporting. Because I think obviously we know how important self-reported questions are and how much they can add context to the implicit responses. But I think people and clients and companies are really starting to understand the importance of kind of going a little bit deeper than just the higher level of self-report.
And
So I'm
what do
seeing
you
that a
think
lot.
that importance is? Like, what do you think it gives? I mean, because, for forever, people have been able to ask liking, right?
Right.
And, they can ask, a series of questions on intent to purchase or whatever it might be, or,
Mhm.
some details about the product, in your basic consumer survey. Why bother asking more? Like, what is it that more is getting people?
I think it's really just adding more context. Like when we are out in the wild as consumers and we're experiencing all these different products, we're flooded with different types of stimuli, whether that be other products, competitor brands, music in the store, what time of year it is. There's so many factors that go into ultimately what decision consumers are making. And I think understanding kind of some of those biases that are already linked to certain things really helps add context to why maybe one product is well liked versus another, or why maybe if a product is well liked, why is it not really performing that well when it's on the shelf?
Yeah.
Things like that.
Like how better to even communicate these
Hmm.
experiences that consumers have to have when using the product, but how does that even,
Yeah,
appeal to them even, right?
right. And
Yeah.
especially like clients and companies are so close to their own products and their own brands that
Yeah.
they kind of come to the table with their own biases. So they might understand why a product is named this way or why the product has this description. To them, it makes perfect sense. They were the ones that created it, so it aligns perfectly. But to a consumer, it might be a little bit of a different story. So kind of taking yourself out of your own shoes and putting yourselves in the eyes of the consumer and really understanding kind of how they're experiencing all these different types of stimuli.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that there's a particular tool that it's become more asked for or, that's more popular this year?
Yeah, I think the implicit association test is really shining right now. I
Yeah.
think it has been for a
Affordable,
few years.
easy.
Yeah, it's so easy, so seamless. I feel like a lot of different research suppliers are adding that to the kind of like their repertoire, so it's becoming more popular. But I'm also seeing more of an increase in kind of things like GSR or facial
Mhm.
EMG. So kind of physiological measurements that are in between maybe like the implicit association test and like an EEG cap. So kind of like that middle ground
Yeah.
between more of just like a perceptual association, but getting more of that physiological response and trying to link it back to more of that self-reported question.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing that too, that, with, during the pandemic and early post-pandemic, I think that people
Hmm.
were still avoiding having, trying to have people come in for a
Hmm.
CLT. But now that that's picking up more, they are starting to add back in those measurements that do require you to like
Yeah,
come in and get
right.
wired up, right? Where implicit can be done anywhere.
Yeah.
But they are kind of coming back to being like, oh, wait, what can we do?
Yeah, right. And I guess that's a question for you, is kind of like as you've seen things progress from with COVID to kind of moving to more remote work or just more people being working online. And have seen research kind of shift from more in-person research to kind of prioritizing online platforms.
Yeah.
Have you seen that kind of trend, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess what I think is happening is that when people were forced to do virtual, right,
Hmm.
that it kind of forced us all to be more adaptive and more flexible.
Hmm.
So we still want to answer research questions, but now it is a little bit more about finding alternative ways to do that. And I
Mhm.
don't think that that's a bad thing, because I think that that way it's allowed us, I think it's worked really well for HCD because we were always flexible, right?
Mhm.
But so
Right.
we've always been very, adaptable and agile, right? So we can figure things out depending on budget, or, where do you in the world do you want to measure? Like,
Mhm.
we find a way to make it work. And I think that's what's allowed us to keep going, where a lot of companies have failed, or even
Right.
disappeared, right? Or they're struggling. I think our ability to remain agile and adaptive to the situation. So that's what I'm seeing a lot more of, even though people are, starting to come back more into CLT situations. They still need to be agile, because they learned something by going virtual,
Mhm.
that there were things
Mhm.
that they could ask, and that there were different ways of doing things. So I think that that's the key. It's just finding ways to best adapt to the different situations.
Yeah. And I think that's really helped us as a company at HCD, just like really staying on our toes and like being able to customize and think outside the box in whichever direction our client needs us to go. Because
Yeah.
we are the first thing that we're going to prioritize is just how, well, like the quality of research that we'll be putting out. So in whatever way that our client needs it to happen, we're going to figure out a way to make that happen.
Yeah. Being flexible, but we also try to stay true. Like, I
Right.
think that we tend to be very honest about
Hmm.
what could
A
go
little too honest
wrong.
sometimes.
Yeah, right. Like, people have asked us, like, what are you doing? You're telling me not to do work with
Yeah.
you? Like, we're like, kind of, because we don't want to give you something terrible,
Yeah.
So we're going to
Right.
tell you no if we don't think it's going to work out. And I think, while it sounds like it's terrible sales technique,
Yeah.
science wise, and, creating good research wise, I think it's the high road is the good road in that case.
Hmm. Right. Yeah. It also always helps us at the end when, we get to the report writing and we're like, oh, why is this a little funky? Why is this a little weird? We've already kind of worked that out in the beginning,
Yeah.
and like have that going in, which is always helpful.
Yeah, and setting expectations as well.
Hmm.
Because we're not reading minds, we're not doing anything
Right.
crazy,
Right.
right? Now that flexibility also lends over into our lives as being HCD members too. There's a ton
Hmm.
of flexibility, and there's a ton of fun that happens. We get to travel, and something I've learned about you is that you really love traveling, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so like, we get to go to conferences all the time. Maybe we'll see you there if you're interested in going to like Pangborn, which, you know, fortunately or unfortunately is actually in our backyard,
Yeah.
this coming Pangborn. But like, we were just in France recently, and you went on a little bit of an adventure, and HCD
Yes.
provide for that flexibility for you to do so. But you really like travel, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that I didn't really realize, but one thing that I learned as I've kind of grown at HCD is how much I prioritize that like work-life
Mm,
balance. So having the ability to not only travel for work, but also having our execs being okay with me adding on to my trip and maybe being
yeah.
gone for 2 weeks after the conference, which is pretty outlandish if you think about it. But I've definitely seen kind of my priorities shift in terms of I really like this job because of what we do, but also because of what it allows me to do.
Yeah.
And I didn't really realize how into traveling I was until I started traveling. So now I'm kind of on this kick. I need to explore the actual, United States. I don't need to always go overseas. That's not
Right, right.
always the where I need to go, but it is very helpful to kind of have a starting point when we do go to these conferences. So we'll be going to Dublin, Ireland, actually, in
Yeah,
September
that's
for
our
a
next
conference.
international one. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm kind of in the back of my mind, I'm planning my trip, trying to see,
Yeah.
where I can go, maybe what's another destination that I can tag along.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the cool
Yeah.
thing is, as long, everybody at HCD has agency and has, strong sense of responsibility. So
Mhm.
as long as you get, your work done, and,
Right.
you are doing well at the ultimate goal, then I think that we're all pretty flexible. All right, so we're coming up at the end here. And so this has
Mhm.
been a really fun conversation. I love getting to know
Yeah.
you better, and I love that everybody can get to know you better, because they're going to be seeing a lot more of you.
Mhm.
We're gonna play the game.
Okay.
The free association game, where I'm gonna say a word and you just say the first thing that comes to your mind. There's no such thing as a bad answer. There's no wrong answer. I could say blue, you could say broccoli, and it's fine. If that's what came to your mind, that's totally fine. So I'm going to start it off. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right, here we go. The first word is complex.
Brain.
The second word is neuron.
Dendrite.
The third word is choroid plexus.
Ooh, limbic system?
And nobody else is going to get that, but I knew you would
Yeah.
get it. That's
I feel like
the
I'm like in
junk
an
that collects.
exam.
It's the junk that collects from like stuff being removed from your brain.
Okay.
Fascinating.
Neuroscience.
Revolutionary.
War.
Adventure.
Travel.
Travel.
Planet.
Languages.
Spanish.
Memorable.
Photos.
Cultural.
Lebanon. Just because that's where my family's from.
And I think we might be
Love
one over actually, but I'm going to ask one more and I'm just going to say
it.
electric meat.
Grilling.
Totally fine. That was a trick one.
Okay, I was gonna say, where did that one come from?
Yeah, it was because I was at a meeting where we were educating a team at a company, a
Okay.
client, and I was talking about, there's 100 billion neurons and 100 trillion connections among those neurons, and that we are all, as people and as animals, all just essentially electric meat.
Electric meat.
Yeah.
Okay. That's funny. A little disturbing when you put it that way, but
I know. But it's kind of like a little tongue-in-cheek kind of joke.
yeah.
But yeah, so thank you so much, Sophia. And this has been a fun conversation. We're going to have a lot more because I believe upcoming, we're going to be talking about some research papers that we see because we love sharing that stuff. You can follow us on social media to see some of those papers that we share, that we see that relate to applied neuroscience and consumer neuroscience. You can follow us on LinkedIn or on Twitter/X or on Facebook. And we're actually talking about having maybe a TikTok series. Sophia has a little bit of a TikTok account, just
We'll see
but
how that one grows.
but we love sharing this information with you. So you're going to be seeing Sophia a lot more in the future. So thank you so much for joining us. Everybody else, thank you for listening in again. And please stay tuned for the next episode. Looking forward to talking with you again.